Hey, welcome to Talk Politics, the only show where you not only watch news, but help make it. Think it like this each Tuesday at 8:30. You can join us for conversation amongst friends about politics. We're going to cover everything in our Talk Politics discussion group. In addition to that, we'll also cover some national nonsense, about 10 stories each week that I believe that are underrated or underthought of. Hey, good to hear from you guys. How's life? Good to hear you. Hey, good to hear from you, Mark. Looking forward to getting the show going and having a great conversation about politics. Like always. Hey, no, Matt, no, it's not Christmas time, man. I just haven't been able to. Well, I just haven't updated the background for my green screen yet, but that will happen. I promise you that. Hey, good to hear from you, Tim. Yeah, this show is indeed a gift, and yeah, right. It's a big Christmas gift. Actually, it's just a stream. I like to interact with you guys and have something for all of us to talk about politics instead of having the news tell us what we need to think about. I think that we're all perfectly capable of talking about what's going on our own. And so we will actually do that. We got 7 folks in here. Welcome y'all. If you are in, make sure to leave a comment saying that you are here so that I know you're here and so that I know that you're engaged. Each bit of engagement helps reach a larger audience. So if you could just drop a comment, if you can't donate to the show to help us expand our reach, if you can just take the time to donate a comment, that's still substantial. Anyhow, we will go to the pulse of the people. And hey, that's right. Yeah. Politics. Yeah. Right. So, all right. Cool. Hey, we're in our Talk Politics page. We got a lot of interesting questions going on here. And we'll start, I guess this time we'll start from the beginning and work backwards. So, then the first question that we mentioned in our Talk Politics group is cutting Social Security. Basically, for years after the rhetoric being the case that Republicans want to quote unquote cut Social Security, as it turns out, hey, yeah, Merry Christmas. It's the case that Social Security will cut itself. So all this time you've been told that Republicans want to cut Social Security when in actuality it's going to cut itself. And I asked, well, hey, do you guys support doing nothing? And for you guys who are just tuning in, thank you for joining us. You guys just go to our Talk Politics page and participate in the discussion. But we're talking about Social Security and doing nothing. And well, we have some interesting conversation about this. Congress has been ignoring the elephant in the room, as Liz mentioned, when it comes to Social Security, and that's put us in a bad situation we're in now. Matt says that we should sunrise it, and I think that's true. But I think another important aspect of this is just updating the Social Security program to 2 separate items, right? If we split it into a mandatory government savings account and a social safety net for blue collar workers, then we would be able to keep the 2 core functions of Social Security intact, right? And instead of counting on the government to invest money for us, we could have our own money in our own banks and really save a ton that way. But I'm really interested in what people's responses to this are, because this seems like one thing, as Liz mentioned, that Congress doesn't want to talk about. I think it's shameful. We have politicians that want to jump up and down and make a big stink about all these other issues, but then when it comes to actually taking care of the number 1 national security threat, which is our finances, they don't do anything at all about it. And heck, they don't even discuss it. So I think that's pathetic. Anyhow, what do you guys think? Should we do nothing about Social Security? Should we split it into 2 separate programs, as I propose, or should we do something else? Dylan mentioned status quo benefits the ruling class. Reform will continue to be ignored. And that's interesting, Dylan, because I was thinking about this before, where if you're in Congress, you're sort of living two separate lives. On one hand, in the halls of Congress, you're able to acknowledge all kinds of problems and you're able to talk about those problems with your colleagues. And then you go out publicly and not only bash the people that you just had a civil conversation with, as we've seen during the C-SPAN episode, but then all the serious problems that you actually talked about, you're saying the opposite to the public. You have people in Congress right now that'll say, Social Security is a big problem that needs reform. And then if they're asked about it by their constituents, they'll say, well, maybe it should be reformed, but we're not going to take it away from you. And then they really don't talk about it anymore. And for anybody concerned about the health and well-being of our government, that we'll say schizophrenia in the sense of split mind, or bipolarity between members of Congress, that should be alarming. To think one thing in private and then to say another in public. So where do we start for reforming Social Security, using it for what was intended for, is probably way out of line. Well, yeah, perhaps, but I think it needs to be updated to meet its legislative intent. I think what Social Security has become since the initial legislation was signed is something totally different. Back then, it was old age survivors insurance largely, and a safety net for when we had blue collar labor. And now we don't have any blue collar labor, and most people live way past 60 anyhow. So, we have a program that's not even aligned with its initial legislative intent, and has since become something else. I actually mentioned reform doesn't have to be retroactive. Why don't they drive that message while talking about the program for future beneficiaries? Well, yeah, no, that's right. You don't have to take anything away. That's exactly right. And I think just people in Congress are afraid to have meaningful conversations about any actual issue. They want to always give the public the pound of flesh, red meat issue, whatever that is. And meanwhile, much larger problems are looming in the background that people don't want to talk about. It's the whole reason why I started this show, because I didn't feel like the stuff on the news or TV or whatever makes any sense or is talking about the most important issues, right? We need to be supporting more independent media creators so that maybe we can get some honesty from the press. Tim mentioned elected officials are part of it, while the stocks of elected officials and just sell. Well, yes, there's financial problems in Congress too. Our other friends in our Public Talk Politics group, and if you're just joining us, you can follow at the link that I'll post in the chat here. But other friends, Liz and Liz Terwilliger and Stephen Warhafferty, if I said that correctly, those guys, and I think you guys should subscribe to their Substack. It's right here, and it's really worth reading. I think Stephen is an excellent writer, and he talks a lot about the fiscal issues that our corrupt media and corrupt politicians are typically overlooking or not discussing. And one thing that he was highlighting in the most recent article is you have in the state of New York, you have the state of New York looking to put on a streaming tax, a streaming tax in order to finance the broken subway system. Now tell me that's not crazy, and tell me that doesn't highlight the absolute depravity of so many politicians. Is that typically when it comes to taxation, the sound principle of taxation is if you're taxing somebody for something, you're doing it because they get a high benefit, allegedly, from that taxation. That's why, for example, people pay property tax, because everybody benefits or reaps some reward from having educated citizens. So that's why you pay that. But in this, with the streaming tax to pay for a broken subway system, there is no such principle. Then that doesn't exist at all. And of course, this is happening in New York City, where instead of giving up on a sacred cow, have the union funded subway system and looking to reform that, they just double down on dishonesty and more taxes to force people out. And I think that's one way that we have to create a micro serfdom is, hey, we're going to tax and spend people out of existence. And then the remaining people who are here who don't know a whole lot about what's going on, well, we're going to trap them here and we're going to make them so poor that they can't even move. And I think that happens. Hey, yeah, hey, good to hear from you, Rob. Good to hear from you, Tim. Good job campaigning out there, buddy. Tim says soon they will tax us just to use the restroom. Just saying it's a stream. Hey, I can see that, Tim. But I think for anybody, this should be concerning, and perhaps you should ask your legislator to do one of two things: to proactively pass legislation saying that they won't tax streaming and television services, or two, to support truth in taxation, where anytime there is a tax increase, the public has to be notified and have that be voted on. I think if we had more truth in taxation legislation, then we would have a government that's closer to what the founders wanted. If you recall, during the British Tea Party, one reason why they dumped so much tea was because of high taxes, indicating that that's a sticking point. Well, for American citizens, that same thing should happen. We're taxed and taxed and taxed, and yet nobody knows about any tax increases. Those things aren't discussed, and then we wonder why things keep getting worse, because there's not any transparency when it comes to taxation, particularly in Pennsylvania when it comes to schools. Anyhow, interested in hearing from you guys. What are you guys' thoughts about the New York State stream tax? You support it? You think it's cool? You have concerns? Let me know. We didn't have a lot of discussion, but as I mentioned here in our discussion group, there should be more truth in taxation policies. We need transparency when it comes to taxation, which we don't typically have. Now, I asked, and this was a great post and a great engaging post, is what's the biggest story you believe isn't receiving enough attention right now? Joan mentioned the budget, and I think that's interesting, and I'll talk about that here briefly. And that I don't know a whole lot about what's going on I haven't been keeping up with as much as what's going on in the Pennsylvania budget, but I do know that the federal budget, or the federal, if by budget you mean debt ceiling, that politicians are working on some kind of agreement to add work requirements for federal entitlements, and to take back some of that COVID money that was just printed and passed out that should have never started to begin with. So there are some positioning and moves being made there. It's not clear that the White House will budge, so it may be the case that we have a shutdown. Which, that's a really good question. That's something I would like to hear what you guys think when it comes to shutting our government down, or cutting spending, or defaulting on the debt limit, or reducing spending. What do you guys think should happen? Do you think that we should consider defaulting because we're not limiting spending? Or do you think that we can't do that? To me, I think that Republicans got to hold on for as long as they can and do all they can to extract as much concessions to start with, because the whole reason why a debt ceiling was put in place was indeed to be a debt ceiling. It's obviously not a ceiling if you can undo it, right? That's something else, but it's not a debt ceiling. Mark wanted to know about, hey, good to hear from you, Lil. Mark wanted to know who's behind murdering our kids in school shootings. As I pointed out last week, School shootings aren't as prevalent as the media suggests, and well, that's typically overlooked. That's overlooked because it gives the progressive left an opportunity to fundraise off of tragedy. You know, if you pay attention, you'll see all kinds of fundraising appeal letters by left-wing politicians after any violence happens, that'll go right into people's inbox. In addition, news companies want to actually promote these things so they continue to sell ads. You'll notice that ratings increase anytime some kind of major tragedy happens. Yeah, one is really too many, but what happened to local and personal responsibility? Why aren't local school districts doing a better job of policing those things? And why are people turning to the federal government for each and every solution? I think that for any of us, we should find that problematic. And a lot of it's because of the perverse incentives of the media. The media wants everything to go to the federal government because they don't want individuals to feel empowered to provide their own solutions. If they did, perhaps they'd spend less time watching TV. And of course, you can't have that. Stephen wants to know wanted to talk about the 20% increase in payroll taxes to keep funding Social Security, which, hey, as I mentioned, the whole idea of Social Security is pretty interesting, right? It's one heck of a euphemism because Social Security hasn't made our country any more secure at all. Instead, actually, at this point, it's social insecurity. We don't believe that people are smart enough or good enough or diligent to save. So we have to have some government retirement program that's not a retirement program, but it is, and it's a big scam. And well, as others, yeah, we are less social. That's right. I don't know the degree to which this social security program has made people more social. Fritz wanted to talk about human extinction timeline, followed closely by the meteoric rise of the Fourth Reich fueled by Fox News. Well, I don't think there is a meteoric rise of the Fourth Reich. At least nothing that I've seen. Now, I will say humans, at least in the United States, are pursuing extinction because too many don't believe in having kids, or they pay too much debt to be able to afford kids. So in some ways, yes, indeed, we are going extinct. But that's an aspect that people don't want to talk about. It's okay if we don't have kids and go extinct and lose population, as long as we can all sing Kumbaya and pray to Mother Nature and trees and the other great gods of green energy. Tim mentions when a 6-year-old gets a gun, the parent needs to be held accountable. No one wants to be held accountable. Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Tim. You know, when it comes to the gun issue, why isn't the parent being held accountable? You know, the only people that can be held accountable is law-abiding Second Amendment citizens. We have to take their guns because somebody else did something that's not their fault, right? It would be interesting, for example, if I didn't pay my taxes, but I could convince the other people in the state to just give up some of their extra money to pay my taxes. I think that's a good analogy, and that's analogous to the mass shooting situation. And Ron wanted to talk about the new digital dollar and how the Fed will control money using this. I do know DeSantis came out and said that he opposes digital currency created by the government. I don't think that's a particular threat at this point in time. But if the concern is being spied on by the federal government, well, things are about to get a lot worse. And I'm not going to bury the lead for that story. We'll talk about that in the national news and nonsense portion of our show following that. Somebody mentions Ethereum is going nuts. Yeah, if you're a crypto investor, maybe, check that out. Boy, so this is one of the favorite questions that I've ever asked right here, and I think this is definitely worth thinking about. And what I asked was, it's become popular for unviable candidates to run in primary elections so they can sell books or become pundits on Newsmax. And I asked if anybody liked that practice. Nobody seemed to really care for it, but well, I wanted to ask because as it becomes primary season, we should really be doing more when we have all these crowded races to sort the wheat from the chaff. In the state of Pennsylvania, for example, we let a lot of chaff, we'll say, just participate in elections, even though they knew that they weren't going to win, in some cases to do more fundraising for themselves or for a business. I think that's a problem. Well, yes, Tim, if a person uses a knife, that is, yeah, it is a problem. But I wanted to talk about this. So what is it then that you guys think? Do you like having a million candidates in a primary, knowing that many are unviable? Most people who voted said no. Stephen mentioned the more people who can appear in primaries, the better. I just object to funding private organization primaries by people who cannot vote in them. And what I really think, and hey, good to see you, Diane. I was just talking about unviable candidates running in primaries. And what I actually think we should move to is exactly what it is that Alaska has. Alaska has open ranked choice primary where the top 5 candidates, regardless of party, are able to be on the ballot. And I think that's the most sensible thing. It lets more people vote, it creates more input, and it gives people ample choice. Instead of having just 2 candidates, you can have up to 5, and I think that's good. You know, that goes, I don't know. It seems to be the best option. Steve mentioned, I agree with Steve, force people to research the people that they vote for. I don't think there's any way, Mark, to force people to research candidates. And that's why I think that you need to have a top 5 ranking system. Actually, in the state of Pennsylvania, for the last election, if we would have had a top 5 voting system, I think it's clear that the gentleman who ended up winning the whole race, Fetterman, would not have won. I don't think anybody would have ranked. I don't think Fetterman would have got enough first or second place votes to win. How do I propose to do open ranked choice primaries? Well, the same way that Alaska did. I think that there should be legislation passed in the state house to have those open ranked choice primaries. It's up to our lawmakers to do so. But here's the thing that we really ought to consider. If we want good candidates of either party to win, and I don't think we can say that Fetterman is a great candidate, at least not at this point in time. If we want the best candidate to win, then we have to go with some sort of ranked choice, particularly when Republicans are becoming less and less competitive. In the state of Pennsylvania, we've lost a number of statewide races because our primary process doesn't seem to be selecting good candidates. You know, that's problem that should be problematic. In fact, in a few gubernatorial races, 2 different candidates lost by over 10 percentage points. You know, does how long does that have to happen before we move on to a different system? Should we just let candidates lose by 10 percentage points for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? I don't think so. And I think any prudent leader would have the same assessment. But that's my thoughts. What do you guys think? Should we have open ranked choice primaries, or should we just keep on letting anybody into the primary process and then also having candidates that aren't successful? I don't think so, but hey, let me know. Rob mentions I'd like to see a state-based electoral college, and somebody did mention that, a gentleman, and I'll have to connect you, Rob, to him. He is he has a show called Commonalities. Matthew Dowling, he told me that he supports a state-based electoral college also. So I have thought about the idea, but I don't know if that totally solves the problem of nominating bad candidates. You guys, we were talking about more debates between political candidates. This one was almost unanimous yes with 33 votes. And what I'm considering doing in the future is having people debate the positions of different candidates. So, I may have in the future for the presidential primaries, I may have different people come on and represent different candidates and then have a debate. So that way we have at least a little bit of information. Mark mentioned we are overlooking the fact that elections are far from legit. Does it really matter how we do it with tampering and fraud out of control? Well, it depends on what you consider tampering and fraud, Mark. One thing I will say is that during the last presidential election, I didn't think that it was right that many state Supreme Courts changed the mail-in balloting rules to make it easier for people. Well, it's not even making it easier, but it's just undermining the rule of law by changing the rules at the last minute. To me, that doesn't seem right. I don't think that court should have that power. But on the other hand, I think it's unequivocally clear and true that Republicans really didn't do their best job in driving a narrative that resonates with people, having the best candidates, and then also taking the right amount of grassroots action. I know that in a number of different counties that I've been to, I know that a lot of Republicans who feel that the vote that the election was stolen, a lot of those people didn't knock on doors, they didn't make phone calls, they didn't write any media contribution. And so at the end of the day, when they lost, it's like, well, yeah, a lot of this stuff wasn't right, but what was it that you did that you were responsible for? I think when it comes to voting and electoral success, there has to be more personal responsibility and accountability from all parties, because I don't think everybody's always giving their best effort all the time. And I know, well, because I've participated in those things. Yeah, Rob mentioned state Supreme Court changed election law. Nationally, very different than local. Local election boards are totally left unchecked. And Tim mentioned perhaps the free debate process could help selecting proper candidates. Yeah, I think that's true, Tim. I think we need more debates. And I think that if candidates aren't going to debate themselves, then other people who scream should take advantage of that opportunity. I may do so in the future here because, well, I think at the very least, the public needs to have greater information. And now in the presidential races, media companies aren't going to want to pick a side. They're actually not going to want to have any debate because they think that could undermine them and themselves in the future. So they're not going to have any debate. They're really not even going to discuss anything because they fear that could jeopardize their position in the future, which I think is pathetic, but that seems to be the direction that we're going in. I asked if Joe Biden did a good job as president. Most people said no, and that if he did do a good job, he did the best job at deliberately destroying this nation. Well, that's that. Oh, and then I overlooked this question here, or that's in response to that last question, saying, well, if you think Joe Biden isn't a good candidate, shouldn't you do all that you can to get the best candidate that can beat him? And I think that that's something that many of us may be overlooking, is perhaps it's the case that we're not thinking enough about who the best candidate that can beat Biden is going to be. And I think that winning has to be a priority for Republicans if they want bad Democrats out. And if we can't get back to that and we insist on ideological purity test and whether or not you pledge loyalty to this candidate or that candidate, that's not going to do any good. And I think that that's a poor way of doing things, a poor way of thinking about it. So, we need to do more to win. We need to select the best candidate to win. At least in my estimation. I like competition, and well, it may not be much competition if Republicans, I shouldn't say we, but if Republicans select bad candidates. Rob mentioned if the candidate's policies are just as bad as Biden, what's the point in winning? Well, I don't think any Republican candidate is supporting policies as bad as Biden's. I don't think that's happening at all. Um, I didn't see anybody that was campaigning as a Republican on Joe Biden policy of raising taxes, raising spending, and destroying our energy. No, yeah, for sure. There are some Republicans in name only for sure. But I didn't see any of those people run. I think the the worst Republican would still support better policies than what Biden does now. And there are some Republicans that I disagree with, like Murkowski and Collins, for sure. But Murkowski and Collins, even when it goes back to the stimulus back during the lockdown era, even they didn't support as much wasteful spending as Joe Biden. So even the worst Republicans are typically better on spending than Joe Biden. Oh yeah, we can debate individual candidates, and I'll set out a special time for that. But I'm still trying to drive home the message that Republicans need to focus on winning and being competitive instead of something else. I don't think that Republicans have done enough to emphasize winning. And well, in the state of Pennsylvania, Republicans haven't won, and that has to be somebody's responsibility. Well, we will now move on to the next. No, it's not over. The show's still going on. And anyhow, hey, good to hear from you, Lois. But anyhow, we will be moving on to the next scene, national news and nonsense. I got 10 interesting stories, one about our former president and supporting more war. Stay tuned for that as we move into national news and nonsense. Hey, so we're back in national news and nonsense. And if you enjoyed the show or are enjoying the show, head over to our Talk Politics shop. It helps us reach even more people and a broader audience with a message of civil debate and real interaction instead of having somebody tell you what to think or how to think or what to do. You can support us and get that message out there so more people can be involved in an even better, more robust conversation. Like great people like Rob, Tim, Mark, Will. You guys are all part of a great conversation. I'm happy you're here. And I want to share that opportunity with more people. So if you guys go to that Etsy shop, etsy.com/shop/talking politics, you can get one of these sweet mugs. This one says, forget football. My Super Bowl is the next election. Got an OG Talk Politics mug. And then if you're feeling real swag, we got a straight out of the grassroots shirt. Pretty awesome, huh? I made that for you guys. So go to the store. But in the meantime, I want to cover the national news and nonsense to highlight the absurdity of our federal government. Speaking of that, 15 years for the feds to approve a 700-mile electric line and another 5 years before it's operational. Think about that. So in having high energy bills, we can't even build new things to lower cost in general. And it takes 7 years to build any new things. And that's, well, a lot of that's Biden's fault. Biden didn't support legislation that would help streamline this process, and instead, we cannot build anything. We're hoping that a 3,000 megawatt line is operational by 2028. Pretty crazy, huh? I think so. And hey, because we have endless environmental reviews. See, that's the important part to point out about this is that we have endless environmental reviews where basically green groups like the Sierra Club can indefinitely sue to delay any project. So we have civilization hating green energy groups like the Sierra Club canceling the construction of projects that'll make life more affordable for most Americans. Yeah, well, they do keep selling it to big cities too. Another thing, hey, this is a very, very, very interesting story, and I mentioned it in the little blurb about the show. And just think about this, right? Our federal government says that we need, or some people in our federal government believe that we need to get rid of the Second Amendment. And yet, meanwhile, those same people will continue to allow the sale of guns to countries that have gross human rights abuses. Isn't that crazy? And that's so State Department's human rights reports and their failures. This article on Cato, where I get a lot of information, highlights the fact that we do have laws against selling weapons to bad actors in foreign countries, but it's only for bad units. So if there's a corrupt unit in, we'll say, a country in Africa, we can't sell weapons to that individual unit, but we can still sell weapons to that country. Isn't that nuts? And it's really, 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 really worth thinking about that we need to be disarmed domestically, but countries that abuse human rights can still receive weapons from the United States. And the laws in the books don't prevent human rights violations because we're not ending weapon transfers to human rights abusers, right? So I think that's fascinating and worth pointing out as we think about our government and some of the disinformation or misinformation that they're putting out there. They're saying you guys can't have guns, but we need to be able to sell guns to warlords in foreign countries. Yeah, okay. Anyhow, what are you guys' thoughts? Do you think that U.S. citizens should be disarmed, and while we send weapons to foreign countries that abuse human rights? Interested in hearing what you guys think. Speaking of foreign countries, a Pentagon leak reveals 14 U.S. troops in Ukraine. Isn't that so fascinating? We now have boots on the ground in Ukraine. So we were told that we're told that this isn't a proxy war against Russia, and yet we have 14 troops on the ground right now. 14 troops. Now, of course, that's not a ton, but that's not what our federal government, yeah, like we have all along. Yeah, we probably have, Mark. But well, so in addition to having those troops on the ground, another interesting story that came along some time ago was that the FBI is assisting the Ukrainian government in weeding out corruption. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation that we're paying money for is instead assisting the Ukrainian government. And then in addition to all the billions of dollars that we sent to Ukraine, now we have our own troops over there. And I think we have to ask, well, yes, but it's worth asking, why is this going on? And How long is this going to continue for? I mean, I don't think there's any formal declaration of war. I don't think anybody told us. The federal government should be honest. And again, as it states in this article, recall this leak isn't the first hint that Biden's promise not to send American troops to fight in Ukraine or attack Russian forces is only kept on a technicality. So Biden said we wouldn't have troops over there. And well, I guess technically he's right, but we do have plenty of people over there. So that's another dishonest bit of information from our government that we should all be concerned with. It has this author notes here: putting Americans in Ukraine, although only a few, could be a path to direct confrontation with Russia too. And sometimes, you have to wonder, is that what it is that we're after here? Mark mentions who do we think is driving the tanks we send them? And because the American people have no control over their business. Well, yeah, right. It's exactly right. So, it's up to us in this next election to make sure that we're able to get somebody electable that can get us out of there and quit escalating these meaningless wars. Somebody mentioned some facts about wanting to talk about Medicare and Social Security and wanting to talk more about that. One fact that really sticks out is that if we don't address it, that the payroll tax to cover the 75-year Social Security unfunded obligation would mean that median wage earners would have to pay an extra $1,600 in payroll taxes. Boy, isn't that sweet? More taxes. Who supports that? And when does it ever end? You see, it's going to be really crazy to have young people when the day finally comes that this thing gets adjusted. Young people protest that the government isn't letting them pay more taxes to keep this broken system. There's nothing more for anybody who's under the age of, well, under the age to collect. This is one of the biggest scams in the world. Then we got a couple other interesting stories here. We got two on Trump, the Fox Dominion settlement, and being spied on by the federal government with more leaks. Bill mentioned that they're robbing from Social Security to fund pet projects. And to some degree, that's true, but Social Security was never a well-designed program from the beginning. And it was sold to people as something that it actually isn't. It was sold to people as a retirement program, but really it was just a safety net for some people. And it wasn't the retirement program that it's become today. We're operating under a program that was authorized in the 20s or 30s that is so far away from its legislative intent that it should be undone. It wasn't meant to be a retirement program. And anybody who's using that in that way is sort of being dishonest with themselves. It's not a retirement program. In fact, it's just a tax on future generations that people, indulge themselves in. This is an interesting story. Donald Trump has recently sided with Disney against Ron DeSantis. Trump said Disney's next move will be the announcement that no more money will be invested in Florida because of the governor. In fact, they could even announce a slow withdrawal or sell certain properties or the whole thing. Watch. That would be a killer. In the meantime, this is all so unnecessary, a political stunt. So I think that's really quite fascinating to hear from the former president in saying that DeSantis's withdrawal of Disney is all a political stunt. I think generally in the last probably 100 years, most of the stuff that's going on in our politics has been a stunt. That's the only thing that people pay attention to is, well, what's the next political stunt we can hatch up to get elected, and meanwhile really do nothing to address Social Security or the endless wars or to address the administrative agencies that are spying on us. Hey, what's the next step? Somebody mentions a lot of the systems in America aren't broken. The incompetent people that run them are. That's a question. Well, I don't know. I don't think, I think it's a combination of both. I think that a lot of people in office right now have private thoughts that are probably right and true, but they're afraid to act on them. And like when it comes to reforming Social Security, for instance, every person in Congress knows that Social Security is a broken program, and each one of them will tell you that privately, one on one, and yet in public, they won't say anything at all. They just run and hide and refuse. Yeah, Bill mentioned COVID was a political stunt, also. Yeah, no, that's, I think part of the reason for lockdowns was, well, hey, we're gonna lock people down, and then if people are locked down, then we can bombard them with information to tell them to vote and increase turnout, even though a lot of the people that were turning out don't really care. To me, then, but it's just rich that the former president is saying that the Disney thing is a stunt. I mean, let's say that it is a stunt. That's mostly what presidents have been doing for some time. Most presidents have been running on a gimmick to win. And I'm not gonna, I suppose, go into the details of that, but most presidential politics is about stunts and gimmicks, truthfully. So, hey, we'll move on to this other interesting story about there was recently leaks about what the federal government was doing, the fact that our federal government has put boots on the ground in Ukraine, even though there was no formal declaration of war. That the feds will probably invoke national security, take away more of your rights, and then pretend that they're keeping you safe. As the story states here, following a massive leak of U.S. intelligence documents that were posted on Discord, the Biden administration wants more power to monitor online chat rooms. So, hey, don't be surprised if you see some different comments in the Talk Politics section of the Biden administration monitoring our chat room, because goodness knows, there's a big conspiracy here. A senior administration official told NBC News that the government's now looking at expanding the universe of online sites that intelligence agencies and law enforcement authorities track. Isn't that awesome? Meanwhile, people are focused on a lot of political theatrics that are going on about the presidential race. Meanwhile, the federal government's planning to take more of your rights away. Isn't that cool? And this is always how it seems to go. Is, hey, we're going to take more of your rights away, and then nobody's going to talk about it, and you're not going to know until some big Twitter files catastrophe happens. And well, so what? You guys just have to deal with it. And I really truly hope that you guys continue to watch and tune into this show, because we're the only ones talking about this. And in this Talk Politics group, we're the only ones talking about the government taking away your rights. Typically, they don't want to cover that. They want to mention some other stories so they can sell you more cheap ads. Somebody mentioned, I wonder if World War III is the only way to implement global government. That was the goal in World War I and World War II. Well, there is global government to some extent in the United Nations. There is also the World Trade Organization. There are some aspects of global governance that could be sensible, like negotiating trade between countries. That could be sensible. But no, I don't think anybody's explicitly out for global. Well, actually, no, actually, I do. There is a when people are talking about global government, one thing that people overlook is that the United States, if there is a global government, the United States bureaucrats want to be in charge of it. That's why the Biden administration pushed so hard for a 15% global corporate tax rate. So that way companies who don't want to pay bad taxes here can't leave and go somewhere else. To me, that's the real globalism. And if there's going to be world government, it's going to be the United States trying to control it and run it, which to some degree has been going on now. We sanction other countries and we issue all these other fines on their businesses. We illegally bomb Syrians and we're illegally involved in Syria. Anybody we don't like, we issue some covert operation on. I mean, it's not likely that American citizens, I suppose, will be the ones that suffer from the oppressive hand from global governance. It's largely what happens internationally. And while our government's doing it, they turn around and blame other nations for resenting us, even though we've been involved in so many illegal wars. And even though we've bombed so many minorities, and even though we've basically stolen countries' money through sanctions. So, that's my take on global government. If there is such a thing, the United States wants to be at the head of the table and oppress other countries. So that way, instead of us working to make ourselves great, we can just keep other people down and call that greatness. I mean, that's what's going on. Bill mentions distractions keep people distanced from real issues. That's exactly right. That's the whole part of this show is that I'm trying to get to the root of our government taking away more of our rights. And that's not paid enough attention to. We're not collectively as a society, we're not thinking enough about that. We let sensationalism and corporate media drive all this often hysterical nonsense to stop us from doing the right thing. Tim mentions exactly, US tells the world like we own it. And then Bill mentioned Trump is taking the side of Disney to make DeSantis look bad, whether right or wrong. And then Mark mentions, in regard to rights, I firmly believe they have to be preserved in local government. Parties need to caucus more and vet candidates with the guts to stand up to state and federal bullies. Yeah, I think it's a very good point, Mark. Bill, the Trump is taking a side of Disney to make DeSantis look bad, right or wrong. Well, sure, but that kind of highlights the absurdity of our presidential politics. DeSantis may have felt compelled to take action on Disney for a presidential run. And that was sort of probably a stunt in a way. And then Trump wants to call it out as a stunt, even though Trump himself has done plenty of stunts. And so we just get this we'll say poor, bad, useless knowledge because these gentlemen aren't talking about any real issues. So all we're going to get in the presidential race is a bunch of noise because we can't talk about real issues. We have to talk about who did what stunt and who outstunted who. And no, I mean, that's trash. And at some point, as Americans, we have to demand better when it comes to real debate and talking about real issues instead of who outstunts who. It gets kind of stupid. you know uh, Anybody should condemn how presidential politics takes place. It just seems like with each decade it gets to a newer and newer, more pathetic low. And perhaps if it wouldn't have been such a bad process to start with, we wouldn't get candidates that are claiming that they're Republicans that bail out Wall Street, pass the Patriot Act, give us bad justification for war. But goodness knows that that's just a utopia for the time being. Now, this is the headline for the show tonight. The number one thing that I wanted to talk about: Trump endorses using military to crush cartels. I would do that by supporting a proposal from Dan Crenshaw and Michael Waltz. Now, well, just imagine how well that would work. So we have boots in the ground in Ukraine. We have military bases in every probably country in every continent in the world. We have an ever increasing military budget, and now we have to use our military to attack Mexico. Boy, that would be good. Right. The president of Mexico said, in addition to being irresponsible, it's an offense to the people of Mexico. Now, Bill. No, that's right. That's a really great point. I'll address your point and then get back to this. Bill mentioned presidential races are becoming a game show. Yeah, isn't that pathetic, right? To me, this policy, though, being proposed to use our military is almost as pathetic. It's just, yes, there are problems with the border, but why is the military our first solution to all things? Shouldn't that be concerning that the first thing that people want to do is have, right, Bill, drugs could endanger our national security. But actually, when it comes to drug use, most of the fentanyl that's coming in here is being brought in by U.S. citizens. But see, that's not something that's often talked about. In fact, when politicians are confronted with that fact, they shut it down. Why? Because they can't use it to fearmonger. And they don't want to tell Americans, hey, we have to do more to stop using drugs. You guys have to hold yourselves to a higher standard. Instead, they want to blame somebody else, like Mexico, so you can get involved in another endless war. I mean, who knows how long this would go on for? I mean, how long would that go on for? Now, Walt says, well, we're not talking about an invasion of Mexico. That's a bunch of nonsense. He said, could we be talking about very selective special operations targeting a key personnel or kill force / capture? Yes, absolutely. Well, it's hard to see how that wouldn't actually lead to a real war. And do we have the resources to escalate something like that? I don't think so. Where are we going to get the taxpayer funds to keep this going? Tim mentions, but the drugs are coming from everywhere: China, Colombia, and etc. Well, right, yeah, that's why it wouldn't make any sense. Now, the organization that I work for in my day job, Americans for Prosperity, our solution is we should have more regional processing centers at the southern border so we can identify exactly whom it is that's coming in and know if they have a credible claim to asylum or not. Wouldn't that be more sensible to have regional processing centers on the southern border? If you did, you could identify who's coming across. Instead, either attacking cartels with military force or building a wall, you're still not going to be able to identify who's coming through. Wouldn't it be just easier to identify who's coming through so we can have a better understanding of what the problem is? But instead, we have to go for violence. We have to blow these people up, or we need to build a wall. Well, the wall isn't stopping as many people as we're led to believe. And even if it was fully built, if people got around it, you still wouldn't be able to identify who got around it. We need a better way of identifying who's coming into the border instead of some pseudo solution to the problem, right? Well, anyhow, that's my 2 cents. Yeah, drugs are like prostitution, supply and demand. Well, I think so. I have a personal position on it. I think that there should be more done to ensure the safe manufacture and responsible use of drugs. So I'm not advocating for the use of drugs. I'm saying that I think that there should be more done to create safer alternatives to drug use, and I think that could better happen. In fact, one of the reasons I was reading this on Cato the other day. One of the reasons why fentanyl has become so prevalent is because of the vast crackdown on drugs to start with, and fentanyl is more potent than other drugs, so it's easier to conceal. So the attempt to fight this war on drugs has only created more powerful drugs that are coming in greater supply now. Who would have thought about that, huh? Big Pharma killed Pablo Escobar. Well, I don't know if I have an opinion on that. I'm just merely suggesting now that incarcerating people for illegal drugs has just led to an evolution and change so that there's more drugs and there's more potent drugs. I don't think we're ever going to win this alleged war on drugs, which it's questionable as to whether or not we should even be trying to wage such a thing, particularly when it's nonsense. You can't have a war on drugs. Wars are between two different parties. You can have wars against drug users, and that would thereby be a war against American citizens, which I think you have to have a declaration to do. So that's my argument on that. That's what I got. I guess I'll stick around for a couple minutes. What is it that you guys want to talk about? You guys have any topics this week that were not discussed, were discussed, things you want to hear more about, hear my take on? I'd be happy to do that. In the meantime, go ahead and check out etsy.com/shop/talking politics. That's the best way to make a contribution to our show to reach even more and more and more people so we can have real substantial political conversations instead of the nonsense that goes on TV. Well, all right. Well, if there's no further questions or commentary, we will. Yeah, Bill mentioned drug issues like gun issue, lack of personal responsibility in this country, which is enabled by a lawless government. Yeah, well, there's not enough responsibility for sure. Stan, the links. Okay, the links to what specifically? I'm happy to send links from the individual show, but you just got to tell me what links specifically. I did send a link about etsy.com/talking politics. Well, so yeah, that will be the end of the show. I'll also do another quick plug for a blog that I sometimes keep up with. You go to sigmundreichenbach.com. No, I think, Rick, the only thing that I should be running for is probably my own health and well-being. I think that would be the most important thing to run for is for for being healthy. Yeah, no, right, yeah. Okay. So if you're in the chat, go to etsy.com/talking politics and you can get some sweet swag to help our glorious show. Right here, etsy.com/talking politics. But no, I would never run. Probably, I don't think I'd run for office, man. The current state of affairs is a yeah, no, yeah, right, Tim. No, I most definitely need to run for health. But no, I just think that the current state of politics is so bad, and there's so much pandering going on that really someday in the future, I just like to continue the show and talk about the individual issues. I think that that's an approach more people should take. Is instead of claiming that they're going to Congress or the General Assembly or whatever to change culture, more people should start their own shows or find ways to engage others in meaningful conversation other than other than allowing the TV to dictate to us what it is that's happening. That's garbage. So anyhow, well, hey, good to hear from you though, Rick, and hey, thank y'all guys for joining. This is Talk Politics, the only show where you don't just watch news, but help make it. It's on every Wednesday at 8:30. I think I said Tuesday in the opening. Every Wednesday at 8:30, and make sure to participate in our groups. You guys can post anytime that you'd like about any topic you want. I just happen to post because, well, I'm moderating the group. But if there's an issue you guys want to talk about or engage others in, make sure to post in that group. And, well, that's all I have. Until next time, we'll see y'all same place, same time, Wednesday, 8:30. We hope y'all have a great one.